very close. Okay? Okay, next one. All right, so question 6. When writing my research report, now I'm moving on to more explicitly that topic up there. When writing my research of those stories. So researchers retell participants' experiences and represent their sense making. So you've got the participants talking about their experiences, and then the researcher has to represent those experiences in the report. So that's a huge responsibility that the researcher has in reporting on the experiences of the research participants. They also have to focus on the particular research questions being asked. So you're not just telling stories, you're focusing on the research questions, and they have to show that they're drawing on appropriate theory. So I mentioned this earlier on. You're focusing on the experiences, on the research questions, and also on the appropriate theory that you're using that's informed the design of your study, that's informed the interpretation of the study. Often you find with qualitative research, right, that if you have a look at the findings section of qualitative research, you break it down into different themes. So they say, this is the theme. They'll present a piece of data and extract from the data, and then leave it up to the reader to figure out what the extract means. Or no discussion, no interpretation of that data. In other words, what they're doing, the report is doing, is simply describing that data. You've got to do much more than simply describe that data. Just telling stories is not enough. I'm an editor of an international journal called Language Teaching Research, and we used to get articles submitted to the journal, which were really good narrative inquiries, where the stories that were told were very, very good. But they were just on the level of description. They were just telling the stories of the participants that the researcher did the research with. And there was no deeper level, no theoretical discussion. It was mainly at the level of description, so we had to reject them. We didn't even send them out for review. And we felt so bad because they were really good stories, but they're not going to get into an international journal. You've got to go much deeper, right? You've got to talk about the implications for a much bigger audience. Okay, so for example, when you are preparing a report, a narrative inquiry report, this can be for a dissertation, it can be for a thesis, it can be for an article, it can be for whatever report you're writing, whether it's a conference presentation, poster presentation, whether it's a workshop. These are the significant variables that you need to consider in planning and preparing a research report. So the report here is right in the middle. If you go firstly to the bottom, the purpose. What is the purpose of that report? What is your aim of writing that report? So for example, are you writing it for a top reputable international journal? Then there's certain decisions you have to make, right? You can't just leave it on the level of description. It's got to be strongly theoretically based. It's also got to have implications, theoretical, methodological implications in terms of your topic that make sense for an international audience, right? So what's the purpose? What are you doing it for? If you've done an action research project and your purpose is to share the findings with the teachers in your school, very different purpose. Your report will look very different because it's only relevant to the teachers in your school. So what is the purpose? What are you trying to achieve? Maybe you've done a research project which has a regional influence. So you've done something that's important for Indonesia. So then you write an article that will go to a journal that's regionally based. That will be important by Asia TEFL, for example. That will be relevant to Indonesia and to other Asian countries in the region here. At the same time, you could use the same data and write an international journal article, but it will have a different purpose. Okay. So the purpose is important. If you look at the audience, who's the audience going to be of your article? Is it going to be a local teacher conference? Then you plan your report for that audience. What do they want out of it? You know, if you plan a conference presentation for an international conference, you present very local findings, they won't be interested. And vice versa. If you go to a regional a teachers conference here in Solo, and you have a report that's relevant to a major international audience, they're not going to be interested because it's not relevant to their lives. So who is that audience? So purpose and audience relate to each other. So you have to figure out, is what I'm saying in my report relevant to the audience? And that depends how, you know, what you say, how you say it, and so on. And the researcher, what about the, not yet. So the researcher, what about the researcher? What perspective do you want to show about yourself in the article? Do you want to put yourself in that article? How do you want to insert yourself in that article? What point of view do you want to put across in the article? I was just showing with narrative inquiry that there's often a close relationship with your participants. Do you want to reveal that in the article? And how much so? How much do you want to give your opinion about what you're finding? Do you want to say that these findings represent something that are of national significance, and therefore this is what we have to do, this is how we have to change? Or do you want to take a less activist approach and just be more descriptive and more subtle and less ideologically active? Or are you trying to make a point, trying to bring about transformation? What do? You have to consider what the audience is. I mean, what your visibility as a researcher is. And then your participants. With narrative inquiry, this is so important because your participants have been telling you about their lives, right? Stories about their personal lives. How much are you going to be putting in the article? Are you going to be revealing details about their lives that they may not want you to show them? How visible are you going to make their personal experiences? Particularly with narrative where you only sometimes have 2 or 3 participants. Will they be identifiable? How are you going to de-identify them? How are you going to hide their identities? How do you make them less visible? So the participants are what? How much do you want to include about them? How much data do you want to put in the article about the participants? How much of their voice do you want to show? So do you want to include a lot of their quotes, their direct speech quotes, or do you want to paraphrase it more? All right? So these are the balances you need to work with. The topic, so this is important because with that journal I told you about language teaching research. You often get articles submitted that are about language learning. And we said, no, this is language teaching, not language learning. Or they submit something on, computer-assisted something. No, this is not a computer journal, this is language teaching. So the topic has to be relevant to the journal and therefore applicable to the audience. So these are all interconnected. You see, I've got 1,000 arrows up there. All these arrows show that these things are interconnected. And then the final one over here is the form. What form does the report take? And if you think about all the ways in which we disseminate our narrative inquiry research, I mentioned a whole lot already, from conference presentations, from demonstration lessons at school, to reputable international academic journals, to local journals, to dissertations, to theses, to term papers. These are all ways in which we get our findings out there, right? Nowadays, you see so much more digitally disseminated work. YouTube videos, you see stuff on social media. I can't open my Facebook any day without seeing a new article or a new link to another piece of research that's been published. And much of it narrative, because of a lot of my connections are narrative people. So I see narrative work coming up all the time, right? And it's disseminated in so many, many different ways. Okay, so when we look at form, the report, the narrative inquiry report, often has a plot. So it tells the story of the research. How much of the research story should the researcher tell? So this is a question worth considering. You know, do you tell the story of what happened in the research? So, you know, there's a conventional structure for an article, or for a thesis, or for a dissertation. You've got the introduction, and your literature review, and you have your methodology, and your findings, your discussion, your conclusion, right? So with narrative research, it's quite useful to show how those sections all link together in a sort of narrative structure. I just finished supervising a PhD student who designed her whole thesis as one long story. And she connected it all. It's available online. If anyone's interested, I can send you the link. Each chapter was called the story of something. The story of something, rather than methodology, you know. The story of how I found out something, I don't know what it was. But she wrote it like a very strong academic story. It was a sociolinguistic study. So, but it read like you knew where you were going all the way through the thesis. Big PhD. You knew where you were going. It was like reading a fabulous story of her study, but very academically strong. So she told the story, but that, you know, more or less of this can be more or less of this. Okay, next. How much data do we need to select to include in the report in order to make trustworthy claims about our interpretation? Because your report's got to be trustworthy, you know, what we refer to as validity in quantitative research. So we talk about trustworthiness in narrative research, quantitative research. So how much data do you need to put in there? How much raw data from what was told in an interview or what was written in a journal? So how much do you put in? It's very hard to do this. One of our PhD students now, he's writing a thesis. She should be finished in April. April. And she's writing the stories of her participants. And she started off including too much data. So she was writing the story, and she had in quotes what they were saying. And she had a few of her words and then quotes. And it was like, I need to hear your voice now as a researcher a bit more. So she was linking the quotes with a few of her words. But it was too much. So I had to tone that down. And then Annie, one of my other PhD students, she did the opposite. She'd write the whole story. And I was like, where's the participant in the story? I need to hear her voice a bit. So it's finding the balance so that the story is heard. The participant's story is heard, but the researcher puts the story together. Very hard. Because you've got to have your theory coming through, right? And it's got to be on the research topic, on the research questions. You've got to combine research questions, the experience of the participants, and the theory. They've got to be there in the stories that you're writing. So when I'm reading their work, I keep these things in mind all the time. Where's the theory? Don't just tell me the story. How is this theoretically relevant? Right? So I'm very strict that they look good. So that's a nice balance. How do you format this? So it's quite tricky. Okay, next. So the choice of language style used is another significant factor. And this is sometimes shown. So researchers represent their participants' life experiences by means of the language the researchers use to re-story their experiences. So the choice of vocabulary and so on. So you've got to be careful that when you're writing these stories, they're not too literary. You know, it was a dark and stormy night as the teacher made her way to class, and so you don't want too much literature, right? It's got to be academic, right? Okay, next. So by the organization of the report, you don't need to read all of that, but this, how do you organize the report? The sequencing of the parts, sections, subsections. So the best way to learn is to read other reports. You know, there's no formula. Read other reports. Read other. The first week I get a new PhD student, I give them 5 PhD theses. I'll take off my shoulder and go look at these. Get an idea of what a thesis looks like. Get an idea in your head now that you're just starting. So you see what it looks like. And many times they say, oh, I think I can do that. Yeah, oh, yeah, I see what it looks like. You know, where you think, oh my God, this master's thesis, I'll never do it, you know. But if you see what it looks like, yeah, it's okay. I think I can manage, you know. So get an idea of what the form looks like. And nowadays they include visual data with drawings. and poetry, photographs, a lot of visual data coming in. Very nice, strong narrative work with visuals and drawings where participants draw and they comment on the drawings. One of our other PhD students from Sri Lanka, she's got students to bring in artifacts from home, like souvenirs, and they talk about these souvenirs, and it's all really interesting things. It's all part of the data, right, that comes in. So how do you bring that in? How do you bring that into the report? So it's becoming difficult, because if you bring in a hockey stick, how do you put that in the thesis, right? So you want to find ways of interpreting the data, of representing the data. Okay, next. So how can I construct a narrative inquiry? So firstly, any questions at this point on that? Because that was the form part of it. I'm going to finish the next 10 minutes, and then we're going to have some time for questions at the end. Okay? But firstly, how can I construct a narrative inquiry with many participants? Because people say, oh, I've read about narratives, there's always 1 or 2 or 3 participants. How can I do it with many participants? So with quantitative research, usually recommend to have a large number of participants. Why? So you can use statistics. So the statistics make sense. You need a lot of participants, right? Especially if you're going to use inferential statistics for the stats to make sense. What do you gain? Well, you can then generalize the findings. But then you lose out on the personal characteristics and personal experience of the people. So you miss out on how people live their lives. It's good to have information about a large population, but how do the people in that large population actually live their personal experiences? So you need to do narrative research to find out. Okay. You can use mixed methods approaches, for example. So one way of collecting data from a number of participants is with narrative frames. And I know some people here have used narrative frames before. A narrative frame is like a story that the researcher constructs with a sentence starter and then some gaps. And then the participant fills in those gaps by completing the sentences. And by completing the sentences, they write a story, right? So you design the story as a researcher, construct the story, but in a skeleton form. And then you fill in the sentence start after the sentence starters, and you write a story. And then the story is about your research topic. And there been a whole bunch of different ways of using narrative frames over the years. So I'll just show you one example here. So over here you can see, here you've got, this was a narrative frame I used with immigrants who came to New Zealand. I wanted to find out about the English learning experiences. So, sorry, it's very small. You don't need to read it out, you just need to see the structure. Right? So over here, in this, I asked them just to write anything they wanted to about who they are. And then over here, this is where the frame starts. And it starts off in the past. And it says, when I first came to New Zealand, my English was, and then they complete that. Soon after I arrived, the problem I experienced with English was, and then they complete that. Another problem I had with my English was, and they complete. After a while, however, okay, and then I realized things were getting better when I was able to. So it's about the problems and the successes of learning English. So the sentence starter is given, and then they complete the sentence to finish writing the story. And so it goes on to now. So the first part was in the past. This is the experiences now of learning English. And then in the future, how they're thinking about the experiences in the future. In the future, I would like to use English to go shopping, talk to my children's teachers at school, and so on. I imagine that I will also be able to, I'm trying to find out about their successes, how they imagine their successes as English learners. So they fill it in. And at the end, do anything else you want to tell me about. Right? So nice narrative frame, and I sent this out to about 41 English learners across the whole of New Zealand. and they completed it with their tutors. So I got these very good stories about their experiences of learning English, the successes and failures of learning English. Okay, this is another one. Thank you. Okay. This is a new approach that someone has used, using photos as well as the template. So with this one, they're called photo narrative frames. So on the top, there's a space, insert a photo that represents your current teaching experiences in an English as a foreign language. And so what they're asked to do, the participant puts a photo in there, and then it says, this photograph shows, and then the respondent writes what the photo is about. Regarding my career in teaching English, this photo signifies or represents, This is because, it's all about the photo. So it's about their professional development as an English foreign language teacher, based on that photo. Okay, so next. So here we've got a photo that this person selected. This is from the article by Grenier and Moody. They selected that photo. Next. And then they put the photo into that space and then filled in this narrative frame about the photo. And then the participant also had an interview, and then I think they did a second and a third photo narrative frame. So collected some lovely data based on the experiences of this teacher. And then finally, next one, I thought I'd show you this example. I just examined a PhD student from Victoria University, Wellington in New Zealand. And she's from Vietnam. And she was doing interesting research on the experiences of teachers doing research in their schools. And she worked on a narrative frame using Qualtrics. You know Qualtrics? Qualtrics? It's, you know Google Forms? Yeah, it's the same thing, Qualtrics. It's free, you can download it, just search for it. It's a better system than Google Forms. It's much more secure. But what she did, she designed a narrative, very skillful, very technical. She designed this narrative frame where you can do things like, look, I have been a junior high school teacher and then she gives examples in the frame to make sure they know what to do. Other places she gave choices. I felt that had enough, didn't have enough. So she gives choices on what they can choose, so helping them to fill the frame in. The topic of, this is the research project, was to put the topic in. I chose the topic because, and then gives space. And it goes on for about 10 pages. So, and then it gives you a choice. This choice that takes you there. Very good. Very good. She gave it to like, I don't know, 50, 60, 100 teachers across Vietnam. So very nice idea. Okay. Yep. So can I do a dissertation with only one or two participants? This often get argued. Well, my PhD was with one teacher, right? And this was 1,000 years ago. So it is possible. So talking about graduate student research. So having one participant would mean that that participant would be intensely engaged. That participant would be very involved in the project. There'd be multiple data collection episodes. You can't just do one interview. That's not enough, right? If you've got one participant. So multiple data collection over an extended period of time. So these are the things you have to think about. Extended period of time. Closely involved in the data analysis process. So they may need to help out with the analysis in some way, go back and forth, showing them what you've analyzed, asking for feedback. So they're probably more involved, maybe even in the writing up process to a certain extent. So two or more would lighten the participant workload. So the participants won't have to be that involved. It's very time consuming. Usually, you know, in like a PhD, there may be 8 or 6, maybe 10, depending on what you do with them in terms of data collection. Could be 6 or 8 or 10. My students normally have about 8 or 10 in a narrative inquiry at PhD level. Master's level, sometimes 3, 4, 2. Depending on the type of research. If it's a more sort of biographical, maybe only 1 or 2 students. Okay? So when you're designing a dissertation narrative study, remember that one participant, it's very comprehensive, it will be an in-depth study of that participant, of the experiences of that participant. So you can't just do one interview. You need to have quite a bit of data from that one participant. 8 or 12 participants, if you've got that many, you can do a cross-case analysis. So you can get the stories of your 8 participants, and then you can do a cross-case analysis, some comparison of those participants. One participant, there's always the risk that the participant will withdraw from the study. Then what do? Right, then you've got no participants left. The safer option may be to have more than one. How can I convince my institution that narrative inquiry is a legitimate research approach? So you often hear, in my country we don't do narrative inquiry. In my university we don't do narrative inquiry. My supervisor won't let me do narrative inquiry. Now, how do you convince your institution that you can do narrative inquiry? Well, just tell them about the many methodology textbooks that are available. Methodology textbooks that are now available using narrative inquiry. Studies published in major journals, the top journals, Applied Linguistics, TESOL Quarterly, System, Asia TEFL, top journals now publish narrative inquiry. There are special issues in these journals on narrative inquiry, edited books by Cambridge University Press, Oxford University Press, all the top publishing, multilingual matters, have edited books. Theses and dissertations. I examine narrative inquiries from around the world, and I get asked to do many more that I can't even examine anymore. Unfortunately, there are very powerful gatekeepers, and this is to be expected because of the traditions, conventions in certain institutions and certain academic institutions. Okay? So to provide, it's a good idea to provide your institutions and supervisors with studies that are published in these top journals and show them these are published, TESOL Quarterly or System or Modern Language Journal and so on. So they, to show that they are being published. And also, you can find dissertations and theses around the world. Just Google them. If I want to find a thesis, I just Google it. Narrative inquiry theses in TESOL or Applied Linguistics, 100,000 will come up. Show them that it's done, So to provide them with examples as much as possible. Okay, and then the final question just for fun, because this one does come up surprisingly. Can I use first person I in my research reports? I did this, I interviewed 5 people, I then wrote this, and well, yes, you can. So I know some authors are uncomfortable using first person, and that may be because of their training as researchers. Often there's an influence, a traditional influence from quantitative research, where you often encouraged to use the passive voice. Interviews were conducted on 9 participants. Rather, I conducted 9 interviews, so using passive voice. And it's difficult to overcome these strong beliefs about report writing. But narrative inquiry is a much more personal, subjective approach to research. And it would be very strange after living with participants, working with them, being in their classes, being in schools, and writing in your thesis, suddenly you're saying, my research partner, the researcher visited the participant's classroom 5 times. I visited the participant. It would be odd to suddenly do that in your report. So writing first person. Okay, next one. So if you have a look, these I just went to 3 journals and opened them up. There's Rel Journal. I apply codes to words, phrases, sentences, short paragraphs in first person. This is the TESOL Quarterly. I investigate the way EFL teaches in complex written education. There's Applied Linguistics, which is the top journal in our field. Our study seeks to reveal that translingual discrimination, that shapes discrimination. I can't really understand what it's about, using first person. Okay, so yes, you can. So these are the 10 questions we covered. Those 5 and the next 5. Okay, leave those up there. And if anyone's got any further questions, we've got about 10 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you. I am Brazilian. I'm a PhD student and I'm also working on biographic
Oh, sorry. Maybe take another one.
I would just like to ask that if I have only one teacher and I have to collect from the one teacher the data, maybe I will interview 3 times, 4 times, or 5 times. So
Saya
how
aja.
I have to analyze which semantic analyze I have to do.
Okay.
What do you say?
What type of data do you have? You're asking, you've got one participant,
One person.
and what data do you have?
Interviews, like I have to interview them
You got interviews.
several times,
Several. How many several? What's that mean?
maybe 4 to 5.
4 or 5 times. That's probably not enough. If you've only got one participant, you need more interviews. Otherwise, the data is going to be too thin. So you need probably more interviews. And you're asking how to analyze it. What do you think?
If it is a narrative study, so I have to use it using to analyze.
Yes. So one of the slides I have on there with the analysis of narratives and narrative analysis. On the analysis of narratives is that thematic analysis. That's fine. So you can do what my students often have that same design, right? So they'll do a thematic analysis of the interviews, and then based on the thematic analysis, they can then write a story of the participants' experiences. So the thematic analysis enables them to generate a story, or you can just stop with the thematic analysis. Or you start off with writing a story about them and then do a thematic analysis of that story that you write. So they're different combinations, right? Okay, so there's no one answer. But it's sounding to me like you probably need a little more data, maybe a couple more participants, I don't know. We'll think about it.
The thing is that I have to study one school, one teacher. Because I come from Pakistan. And we have a schooling system there. We have one school teacher who has to study, who has to teach 5 to 6 classes in a primary school. He is the co-responsible for the whole school. He is the headmaster, he is the teacher, he is the pupil. He has all the responsibilities. So this is my study, to know that how he is teaching, which problems he is facing, what are the situations he has to handle. He has to keep the school record, he has to take exams, he has to pay visit to the parents, teachers, and everything he has to manage. So this is the basic thing that I have to cover.
Sure. Have a look, we talk afterwards, but I had a PhD student who did a similar study, Aziz Khan, and he did a study in rural primary school like in Sharma.
Yeah, I'm from Pakistan.
He's from Nepal. Yeah, well, have a look for his thesis. It's probably University of Auckland Library. You can probably get it. And he went into classrooms, he spent time there talking to family and parents.
Basically, I'm also a primary school teacher. I have been teaching there for more than 14 years.
Yes.
I also have a similar experience. So I just need someone to sit, and I have to write my own experiences with him. So this is something I know what is happening.
Yeah, sounds good. Thank you. Okay.
Thank you, sir.
Any other questions? Oh, okay. Yeah. There, 1, 2, and then 3, 4.
Yeah, to be organized, maybe you can mention your name.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. Firstly, I'd like to thank you, Bu Arifah, for permitting me to join this. Actually, I'm an outsider. I'm not from here. I'm from Polytechnic Madiun. But I've been dreaming of meeting you, sir, since 2019, and finally, I am here right now. I am actually an English for specific purposes lecturer at the vocational college, like 2 hours from here. You know, my master's thesis is was about these two, I mean, narrative inquiry, and I expect to continue my PhD to the university where you are teaching right now, and therefore I sacrificed my time, my money, anything to come here to see you in person. I need to see later after this if you have a little time for me to discuss about my research proposal related to, I really want to research my own self, like self-narrative, and would like to, I just want to challenge Indonesian most scholars that nggak mungkin bisa teliti diri sendiri. You know, most of my colleagues think that is it highly impossible for you to research your own self. So I just want to show them that I can do this. So would you please elaborate a little bit on self-narrative? Thank you.
Okay. Well, thank you for coming all the way. I really appreciate that. It's lovely to meet you. Really is. So you're talking more probably a sort of autoethnography, like an autoethnography where you research about your own experiences in relation to a particular field or a particular topic. So an autoethnography means that it's your experiences, but not just an autobiography. It's not just about my life, but it's about my experiences in relation to another topic. So how you fit into that topic and how you learn from that topic and what you can give back to that other topic, which could be broadly TESOL or methodology or something like that, right? It's an interesting proposal and doing it for a PhD. So I've had requests about this before, and I'm a little bit cautious about doing only about yourself. So if it's a particular topic that's really interesting, because the autoethnography is about a topic, right? If it's a topic that's really interesting, I think you could be a participant in that topic. So I do now have a student who's looking at the experiences of CELTA, the CELTA English training. CELTA tutors professional development. And she's looking at them who work in the Middle East. And she is a trainer of those tutors. So what she's doing in her PhD is she's looking at their lives, but her life too as a trainer of those participants. So she's including herself in the research as with others. And that's always better, I think, because then it's not for PhD I'm talking about. Because then it's a big study, a PhD. So if it's just too self-centered, autoethnographic on one participant, and that's you, the researcher, I think it's a bit limiting. But if it's you and others about that topic, then I'm happy with that. And I know a lot of people wouldn't be, but I'm quite happy with that, because you can draw on your own experience, design the study, you know what's important, what the topics are that are significant in the Indonesian context and so on. So you and others like you could be the participants in the study. I think that would work.
Yeah, I also think about research my friends to my colleagues, actually, 2 or 3 of them, including me.
Yeah, well, okay, don't say that out loud, because because at Auckland they're very strict about working with your friends and colleagues, because you have to go through the ethics approval, right? So, yeah, so don't say that. Yeah. Okay, 1 and then 2.
The next question, maybe we can have like 3 more questions. What if I said, okay, because we still have time in Wednesday. If you have more questions, maybe you can join in Wednesday talk.
Okay,
Yeah.
we'll just do the screen, yeah.
Okay. Please,
Thank you for all the opportunity. My name is Intan Aulia, and I really enjoy your presentation. And you said that subjectivity is welcome in narrative inquiry, but it's possible that maybe my view is different with others based on maybe my different culture or different socioeconomic and etc. And therefore, the result, well, maybe could be also different. And does it mean that one of us is maybe wrong? And can we avoid that?
Yeah. So when I say subjectivity is welcome, that doesn't just mean you just give your opinions all the time, right? You have to be very thorough and detailed, and it's called reflexivity. Reflexivity is the term. You say exactly how you are involved in the research process. You describe your participation in the research process, exactly what you did in terms of data collection, how you analyze the data. You describe, you are transparent about exactly what you've done. So someone else reading the project will say, oh, I see how you came to these decisions. I see how you interpreted this. It's not just that, this is what I think about it. This is what I think. You've got to show the evidence all the time. So the subject, you can say, I see it this way because this is the evidence, right? This is what I see in the data. This is my interpretation of it. Someone may see it differently, but I see it this way based on the data, based on my reading, based on my experience as a teacher, working in this context. This is how I see it. You describe that all the way. So it's not just making things up. You've got to be very thorough. And that's why a lot of the discussion on narrative and also qualitative research gets bad reputation because they think you're making things up.
Yes.
It's got to be systematic. It's very hard. People say, oh, qualitative research, narrative research is easy. It's not. It's very difficult. It's very difficult. It's much harder than quantitative research. With quantitative research, you learn the statistics and you put it in the computer and then, there's the finding. Qualitative research, you're working, and am I sure? It could be this, I'm not sure, let me go talk to someone, maybe. You've got to have ambiguity. You've got to be able to tolerate that ambiguity. You're never sure. So you've got to show why you're making those decisions. There's no statistics. If you know statistics and learn the statistics, you're there, you've done it. You see? You've got to show it all the time.
Okay, thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Mbak Intan. Ya, yes, please, Ibu.
My name is Triwanati. I'm from vocational school teacher, sir. Yeah, I teach in vocational student and interested in this narrative one because I think narrative is about life. It is really about life. I have a five questions exactly, but I sorted into three only. The first is that can we be participant of our own efforts?
Yeah, so that's the same answer to that question over there?
And the only one participant, is it possible?
Well, again, it depends. So for a PhD thesis, I would probably advise against it, but that's just my opinion, because a PhD thesis is a very big project. But you can be. I mean, a lot of autobiographies and autoethnographies have been done for research outside of the formal qualification. Yes, of course, they can be, yes.
Okay, next, and then because I'm still new about this,
Yeah.
my question is that do we need some theories for chapter 1, chapter 2, like that?
Do you need what, sorry?
Theories, background theories.
Yes.
Yes.
It's got to be theoretically informed. I mean, otherwise what you're doing is just telling stories. And just telling stories can be fine, but not in academic research. So the just telling stories fine. So I mean, if you're doing some action research as a teacher and you want to tell stories about what happened in your class, that's fine. There's no problem with that. But if you want to get published in the journal, you won't get published if it's not theoretically informed. You need a literature review that informs the design of the study. Yeah.
And the last one is, what about if I want to listen to my students, then that's English is still not good. I ask them question, for interview in Indonesian language.
Yeah, fine.
That's fine.
That's fine.
But because you said that choice of language style is another significant factor. So,
That's in the reporting of the findings, in your report, in your article that you write. So what can happen there is that if you want to report the data on what your students say, and you're publishing in an English journal, then you probably have to translate it into English so that the readers can read it.
so I will be Indonesian as well.
Well, it depends if there's space. You can maybe do that in an appendix, but maybe there's no space and you just do it in English. It depends on what the journal requires, because journals have different requirements. But certainly in terms of collecting the data, you can do it in English. Yeah. Thank you. Nice question.
Okay, is it enough? Okay, yeah, Lamia. Maybe the last question for today.
Alright, hello from Delhi. My name is Mia and I'm a PhD student. It's nice to see you today and it was great presentation from you. What I want to ask in this presentation is that actually narrative inquiry is about stories actually, but along the way, how we can build the stories justice. The stories justice in order for us to be able to serve the participants of our research. I think that's our question.
How do you serve the story justice?
Yeah, the story justice. I mean, because what you said before that it is based on the interpretation and our interpretation actually, but like you said before that we can confirm actually to our participants.
Yeah.
Our participants.
No, that's why I'm here.
Okay, to our participants. So, is it okay if that in one day, when we confirm to our participants and participants say that, oh, your interpretation is wrong, is it okay for us to then, oh no, is it okay for the participant then to revise like based on her interpretation?
Yeah, so that's a good question. So it's called member checking. So you go back to the participants with the story or with your interpretation, and then you give it to the participants and say, can you give me your feedback on my interpretation or the story I've written about you? So I could say from my experience and my PhD students' experience that 95% of the time they say that's fine. That's fine. Sometimes they come back and they say, oh no, I didn't mean this, I meant that. And then you talk about it and you can make it change. But I don't think they've ever said it's wrong. I mean, that's like a blanket, it's wrong, right? Because I don't think a researcher gets the whole thing wrong. But then you need to negotiate, right? And so you can negotiate what to put in, what to change, but you never put in what the participants don't want in. So if the participant says, I don't want it, then you can't put it in. Because at our university we have very strict ethical procedures, and the participants have the right to their information. So you can't put into the research what they don't want in it, right? So you can negotiate ways that you can maybe change it to make it less obvious what they mean, or you can try and paraphrase it in a different way. But as long as they are satisfied with the final product, that is very important. The other option is, and this is where it's always a good thing having more participants, is that they can withdraw from the study. Say if you have, say, 10 participants and you can't agree on what should be in, they can withdraw. Or you can ask them to withdraw. And then it's safer, it's much safer, because in our university, if you include their data and they are unhappy with it, then the university can get into legal trouble. So that's very problem. You can, well, it depends on the reviewer. But at least if you can say in your article that you did check with them and that they were satisfied with what you had interpreted and what you written, that may be enough. Yeah, that's enough.
All right, thank you.
Okay.
Okay, that's all for today. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, please give a big round of applause to Thank you very much for the great presentation. And I would like to remind you that we still have one talk on Wednesday. If you want, if you have more questions to ask the prof, maybe you can join on Wednesday. And maybe you want to do like the case. Are you sure? Okay, okay. So maybe for the last time, maybe you can give one or two sentences to, I mean, as the final conclusion to make the student not afraid to publish or to do the narrative inquiry and to send their work to the journals. Maybe one or two sentences to close this talk.
Just to very quickly close, firstly, thank you very much for the introduction and for thank you very much. And Dr. Lima, thank you very much for organizing this whole event. It's fantastic. Thanks to the main guy who came in earlier as well, what's his name. So yes, thank you all for coming. It was great sharing ideas with you. It's been a fabulous event. I just want to just say one last thing. That narrative inquiry is about stories, right? It's about the stories that we tell as researchers, but in our lives we all tell stories. So we all tell stories. Teachers, learners tell stories all the time. So let's use those stories. They're very powerful. You know, we can listen to stories and we can cry. We can listen to stories and we can laugh, right? So they're very powerful. Let's use them for research purposes. We tell stories all the time. Everyone, I hope to see you as narrative inquirers one day. All the best. Cheers.
Anyone, you can stay there for a while because the point is we have something special for you. Okay. Oh no, not me yet. Oh yeah. Okay, I'm so sorry. This information for. Sorry. Yes. Okay. For the next agenda.
Okay, I will say thank you for our honorable speaker today, Prof. Gary Patrician, and then I will say thank you to our moderator, Ms. Alivian, and moderator to make us keep on track. And finally, we are coming to the last agenda. I hope by this seminar, many knowledge and pain, and I hope this seminar can and inspire you in your personal and professional journey. And thank you for that for today. And let's close our meeting today by saying Hamdallah together. And see you. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.